Warren, and I'm the Title IX coordinator here. I'm going to slowly make my way over here because I've got my 8 slides, not a lot. I was asked to give a short presentation on the legal aspect of Title IX, and so that's what I'm gearing up for tonight. My background, I'm an attorney. I did my undergrad, though, and my master's degree here at TU, so I'm familiar with campus, spent a lot of time here. And then I've been in private practice the last 5 years, and I'm now back here on campus and heading up our Title IX efforts. And so this is such a hot topic across the country right now, but Title IX itself is a one-sentence law. And so I just put it up here since it's so short. It's just simply that no person in the U.S. shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So the University of Tulsa receives federal financial assistance. So Title IX applies to TU and everybody here on campus. The key words in this one sentence is that it is on the basis of sex. That's how you know if a Title IX right applies and if any of the university's obligations under Title IX apply. If you have sex-based discrimination, harassment, any claims of a lack of access or a lack of a benefit based on your sex, then there's a good chance that Title IX applies and you have rights under it and the university has responsibilities under it. Title IX is a federal law, so that means it passed Congress. Richard Nixon signed this into law in 1972. If the university is not in compliance with it, we can lose our federal funding, and so that's how they use the enforcement mechanism on it. The purpose of the law was to promote gender equality. This was passed at a time when we had huge disparities between females and males in education. And the idea was we need to pass a law to make it illegal for any school to show preference based on sex. I mean, this was at a time when a lot of universities in the country there were still universities that did not admit women. And then you get into college and there's certain degree programs that you're simply not going to be able to follow. And so we had a lot of work to be done. And that was sort of what the legislators who were passing Title IX were concerned with. They were thinking, we've got to remove these barriers so that women have the same access that men have on in their educational pursuits. And education is defined broadly, so it means not only your academics, but it means extracurriculars and, of course, athletics. So anything that a male student should be able to take advantage of while in college, female students should be able to do that with equal access. And that's where the law first started. Now, as with most federal laws, where they begin is not exactly where they end up, and that's what's made Title IX such sort of a hot button issue in the country today, because of the way it's been interpreted and enforced. You've got 3 ways that laws can get handled, either judicial, executive, or legislative enactment. For Title IX on the judicial side, the U.S. Supreme Court has been very liberal in defining what the term sex means. So originally people thought this was a gender equality law. Well, since then the court has said sex means a lot of things. Discrimination on the basis of sex can mean, for example, sex stereotyping or gender nonconformity issues, or anything that you can relate back to a person's sex or gender, and not merely based on what the people in Congress thought when they were passing the law. So it's become a lot broader to include transgender issues and everything under the LGBT ambit. Additionally, the executive branch is charged with enforcing Title IX, and this is what's been in the news a lot lately. What happens is the Office of Civil Rights sets forth guidance on how laws should be interpreted and what they should mean. Some of you may be familiar that since President Trump was elected, one of the newer things his education secretary did was recall guidance that was on how Title IX should be applied in schools. The executive branch is able to both put forth guidance and pull it back at any time because it's not law. It didn't go through Congress, and so it's just at the whim of whoever the president is. And because of that, you get a lot of changes in what a law means based on who's in office and who they appoint to be the education secretary. But an important thing to take away about executive interpretations is they're just guidance. At the end of the day, the federal government through the executive branch can tell you what they think the law means, but until a judge agrees, it's just an opinion. Now, it might be a strong opinion, but it is just an opinion. So ultimately, absent a further legislative enactment or a court coming down and saying, no, this means that, the executive just provides guidance. On that last point on the legislative enactments, the two sort of major ones that have affected Title IX are the Violence Against Women Act, which has expanded sort of the scope of Title IX, and in the Clery Act, which deals with a university's obligation to maintain and report certain statistics about crime. And Kelsey's going to get a little more into that in her presentation, but again, that's an area that affects Title IX because a sex-based crime is a Clery crime, and so you have to operate under both laws at the same time. Okay, so in thinking about Title IX, we look at what does it cover, who does it apply to, and how does it work. So on what does it cover, the key words on the statute are on the basis of sex. So it includes sex discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, sex stereotyping, gender nonconformity. It includes discrimination for pregnancy and parental status. Anything that could be used to delineate on the basis of sex is going to be a Title IX issue. And originally, and this is just an example of how the law has expanded, the legislators who were passing this were not necessarily thinking about sexual assaults on university campuses at the time they were passing the law. They were thinking about getting women admitted to the classes that they want and the universities they want and giving them the opportunity to even get degrees and be in the workforce. But one of the obligations that we have under Title IX is to make sure that the university is an environment that is conducive to everyone's education. And so if the university campus is not a safe place for women, well then women are being denied a benefit of their education. And so that sort of triggers this secondary obligation that the school has. We can't ignore safety issues on campus because if they disproportionately affect women, well then maybe women are less likely to go to college and get degrees. And so that's why issues of sexual misconduct, sexual violence have to be at the forefront of Title IX because we have an obligation to do more than simply say, well, we admit blindly. We don't take gender into account in our admissions or academics, but we make no efforts to make sure that we have a safe campus. Well, that's going to disproportionately affect women. And so that's why all of those things are included in what we think of as Title IX today. On the where does it apply? So the statute says that you can't be excluded from participation in or denied the benefits of or be subjected to discrimination in any education program or activity. The courts have defined this to basically mean anything. So in our recruitment decisions, we have to make sure that we do not have a gender bias in anything with prospective students are under Title IX. Any of our admissions decisions, any extracurricular activity that is sponsored by the school cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. Athletics, of course, has to be sex neutral. All of our academics. It also applies to hiring and firing decisions, discipline and advancement, and then retaliation. Title IX applies not only to students, but every employee of the university is under that as well, including faculty members. It applies to every person here. The last piece of this on the retaliation piece, a lot of federal statutes that are remedial in nature, which means they're trying to correct some sort of wrong in society, they have a provision in there that says if you participate in any way in the aims of the statute, then it's illegal if you get retaliated against. So if you bring forth a report or if you feel that there's been discrimination or harassment, you are protected under federal law from any retaliation by anyone at the university. And the failure to protect you in that matter could lead to legal liability for the university. So and that's the same in most federal remedial schemes, that they want to make sure that the people who have access to them are also protected in taking advantage of them. For the who part of it, it's everybody. So students, faculty, and staff are all protected. So I put a few notes down here on the slide because it doesn't matter, for example, where an act of sexual misconduct occurs. I think a lot of people think, well, if something happens to me and it doesn't happen on campus, what does the university really have to do with that? And it's broader than that. As a student here at the University of Tulsa, you have rights under Title IX regardless of where bad conduct happens. It can happen off campus, it can happen online. The school may be limited in what it can do to the perpetrator, if it's not another university student or an employee or someone under their control, but they are not limited in the resources that they have for you. And so that includes the gamut of university services, from counseling to interim measures such as ways to make you feel safer on campus. That's an escort between classes, if that's a change of some sort of schedule. Those kind of accommodations, they can be triggered regardless of where you experience a sexual assault. And then the same thing with, it doesn't matter if the perpetrator is actually a TU student or TU employee or staff member. Title IX applies based on your status as a member of the community, not based on the other party's status. Okay, so these are basically a summary of what your rights are under Title IX. So these are all things that either the U.S. Supreme Court or courts interpreting Title IX have said you have a right to each of these things under the statute, and if you're not receiving this, there's a problem. And so this is sort of your baseline. The first one is sort of this campus environment piece. It's the right to be free from sex discrimination while you're here on campus. And that's the larger piece that says that we need to be taking efforts as school administrators in assessing what our campus climate is, and on trying to be proactive in making it a safer place. Instead of just being reactive. We need to be we need to be initiating programming, we need to be taking on intervention, we need to be doing things to make sure that this is a safe space for you, and that is a right of yours that the federal government grants you. The second one is about bringing forth a complaint. Title IX doesn't set forth a lot of rules and regulations on how things have to operate, except that they say the school has to have a non-discrimination policy, and they have to have an internal procedure to enforce it. So you have to have a way that you can say, wait a minute, something bad has happened to me, and I have an avenue to get relief from the university. And we have that here. We have internal grievance procedures here at the University of Tulsa. And some of our procedures are under review right now and trying to make them a little more streamlined and, I'll say, user-friendly, just basically to modernize them and make them easier and more accessible to students. But that is a federal right that you have. You've got to have a way to have the harm remedied internally. And of course, that's on top of anything you could do externally. The issue with Title IX is most things that happen that are sexual misconduct issues are also crimes. So the fact that you have an internal remedy in no way prevents or limits your ability to go externally. File a police report, seek something in the criminal justice system. This is just additional to that as students on a campus, you have a right to have it handled internally as well as externally if you'd like that done. During that process, you have the right to be informed. You have the right to have your claims fairly and thoroughly investigated. Importantly, you have the right to interim measures. This is something that I think is really important in Title IX. It says that once you file a report and you say something bad has happened, you don't have to wait till the end of the process to get some sort of determination that your report is credible or that you prevail on it. If you need something right then, you're entitled to it. And so you should ask for it. And if you don't know what it might be, ask someone like me or someone else on campus and just say, hey, I've got some concerns that I want addressed right now. And the university has an obligation to do that because student safety is paramount, and so we have interim measures in place. And that's something that I know that Dean Mills can speak more on, and Kelsey will speak more on, that there are, from class schedule accommodations to housing changes, there are ways to get a result right away, even though the process has just started. And so you don't have to think about, oh, I've got to go through this reporting process and wait 6 months before I'm going to get any sort of relief. We have things in place right now to allow students to feel safe. You have the right to be advised of the outcome of the investigation, of course, and to be free from any retaliation for participating in it. And the last is that you have the right to have access to all of the other resources we have on campus and externally throughout the process. And we have people in place, for example, Emery, who's here tonight, who is with Divis, that is here on campus, and she's someone, because she's not a university employee, that you can go to as a resource and speak confidentially with about any one of these issues. And it's not a university sort of reporting process. It's something private, but it's right here on campus. So you don't have to leave campus to go down to Divis to do it. That's just one of the community resources that we've got brought in right here. The other side of that coin are what the university's responsibilities are. They've got to have a Title IX coordinator. So here I am. And before me, we've had a Title IX coordinator and deputy coordinators, for as long as we've been required to under law. The new switch here that President Clancy really advocated for was having a dedicated Title IX coordinator. So this is my only job here at TU. So I'm not, splitting my time between another activity or other responsibilities. We now have just a dedicated position, and then we have the deputies under it, so that way we can, hopefully just stay ahead of the curve on both our programming, our prevention, and our oversight efforts in Title IX. You have to have that non-discrimination policy that says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex. We have to have grievance procedures. We have to provide training, students, faculty, and staff. A lot of the training that has been rolled out recently that's been key to the enrollment, and then the surveys that are going out, the campus climate surveys. This is our way of both notifying the campus community of their rights and also trying to find out, trying to assess some data. We want to know, if where students feel there are issues and where things could get better in the process. The whole point is that the university has an obligation to be proactive, and I think one of the good ways of doing that is simply trying to compile and collect data about what is actually happening on campus. So when we get a report of sexual misconduct and the student wants to move forward and they want to make a record of it, we're interested in collecting not only like demographic data on the reporting party, but we want to know, do we have a higher propensity for assault on game days, or is it do assaults happen in one area of campus more than another? These are the kinds of things that we are hoping that this data analysis can tell us, so that we can sort of address those issues on the front end. These are the last thing I just want to say is give you the contact information for the Title IX personnel. Besides myself as the coordinator, we have deputy coordinators. Dean Mills is the deputy coordinator for students, and then Krista is for the student athletes. And otherwise, if you're in a study abroad program or an international student, Jane has got additional resources there. The point of having deputy coordinators is not to say that these are the only people you should talk to. At TU, we want our policy to be talk to anyone that you're comfortable with, so that we can get you the resources that you need if you've experienced sexual misconduct or sexual assault, but that these individuals have been specifically trained to provide you with the most up-to-date information that's out there. And that means that if you talk to somebody else, like a professor or somebody that you have a relationship with, they know that they can contact these people to get that additional information. So the idea is that you talk to who you're comfortable with, and we'll make sure that that person has the information that they need, they can get it to you, so you can get the help and the resources that are available on campus. Okay, that's all I've got.
Okay, so I'm Kelsey Hancock. I'm the violence prevention. All right. We can do this. Okay, it's good. So I'm the violence prevention and education program coordinator. I do all kinds of presentations. Most of them are a lot more interactive. I really appreciate informative presentations, but I also like for people to feel involved. And so tonight, rather than try to condense all of the reporting information into slides or handouts or something like that, I am going to essentially take you on a journey where I find out what you know and I tell you what you need to know, starting with where you are. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
So before we start that, I do want to say this. There's this website called Know Your 9. It's awesome. You can get one of these handbooks on it, and it provides basically everything that Matt was talking about, plus things regarding Clery and how Title IX and Clery intersect, which they do, but they also don't in many ways. So for example, sexual assault is a Clery crime, but setting a couch on fire, arson, is not a Title IX crime, or it's not covered by Title IX, but it's covered by Clery. Does that make sense? So they're different things. But the way that we would respond is a little bit different, right? So we do interpersonal violence, gender-based violence crimes. So everything we talk about with Clery applies to Clery crimes, but we're going to talk about it under the guise of gender-based violence. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, let me see that. There's one more. Right. And also, does anyone know, how the Clery Act came to be? I know that there are people here that do, but I don't want to call on them unless there's no other brave soul in the audience who wants to volunteer the information. Madison, do you know, kind of?
Not enough.
Not enough? Okay, that makes sense, and I appreciate that. So, essentially what happened was a young woman named Jean was raped and murdered in her dorm room, and her parents found out pretty late, and the crime wasn't really talked about, and after that, her parents made it their life's mission to ensure that no other parent or student or family member of a student would ever have to go through that again. So they would know the details of what had happened, and they would know that someone was in danger, hopefully before, because they would know the statistics that were happening on campus in real time. There are a lot of rules that bind Clery, and I'm not going to go over all of them, but essentially they created this. They went and lobbied for it. They created clerycenter.org, which if you want more information on Clery, I would suggest going there. But that's why Clery came into existence, because they figured people need to know what's happening on campus. And if they don't, then how can a university respond properly? And that's a good point, if you ask me. Okay, so let's start with the reporting process. How do I look on time?
You almost on for like 5 minutes.
Perfect. So how many of you all know what the reporting process looks like? Let's say, for argument's sake, we all have a good friend. Something happened to them. We don't have to necessarily define what it is, but something happened to them, and they need to report. Where would you go?
You.
Okay, so we have 2 people there. Let's start with Emery, because she is considered a confidential resource on campus. I like that you say Emery first. Do I think that I should ever tell any person who has been assaulted where they should go? Not necessarily. But Emery offers a variety of options that people who are mandatory reporters and employed by the University of Tulsa, we can't offer those necessarily, not right off the bat, at least. Because we have certain requirements by Clery to report certain statistical information about that crime. So, let's take the confidential path first. So you go to Emery. How do you get a hold of her?
Third floor office. Yeah.
Okay, so you go to her office, or you can find her contact information, which is
Bathroom stalls.
bathroom stalls. You can also look in on our website. She's on there. We have a number of different handouts. You could ask just about anybody hey, you know, do you have Emery Lazenby's contact information? She's a DIVA survivor advocate. Okay, so you go in, you make an appointment with Emery. And Emery has all these options for you. So, in fact, can you talk a little bit about like what you might offer a student who would come in and say, don't really want to report to the university at this time, but I would like to take advantage of the resources that you can offer. Can you just give us like a couple of examples?
Sure. So if we had someone that wanted to come in but didn't want to report to the university, one of the first things we always offer is counseling. So we have counseling services here on campus, but if the person is more comfortable going off campus or dealing with something outside of this community, we also offer specific sexual assault counseling at Divas. And I can connect you with a counselor directly that way. I also usually will start by talking to people about what they think they need at that point. So if the person who assaulted your friend is in class with them, maybe at that point they want to talk about shifting class schedules, then we go to them and we talk to Mike. You know, there's all kinds of different things we offer.
And the way that works, because there are always questions about that, the way that works is that essentially we would go down to the dean's office and we would say, you know, there's this student, they've been asking for this resource, what can you do for us? And he would say, oh, let me get on the phone.
Without using names.
And we would essentially arrange that for you. Also, I have a number of questions that I feel like we're going to miss, like SANE exams.
Yes, we can do.
So that would be another thing that Emory would offer at the time. Now, a SANE exam usually it can occur up to 120 hours
Yes.
after an assault occurs. However, we would like for people to go in and get the SANE exam if they feel like they could as soon as possible after the incident occurs. So that's another resource that Emory offers. Now, if you report to Emory, and that's where you start, you can always go to a mandatory reporter and file a report as well. But it all depends on the person's level of comfort. Some people don't want to report at all. They don't want anyone but the few people that absolutely have to know so that they can get a few resources and get through the most trying time, which is, you know, it varies from survivor to survivor, but they just want to get some resources so they can move on. That's actually the most common narrative that I hear. However, if you start with a mandatory reporter, and again, I reiterate, anyone who is employed by the University of Tulsa is considered a mandatory reporter. That means Cass here is an RA. Hi, Cass. She is also a mandatory reporter because technically she's employed by the University of Tulsa. We do that. It was a good thing when it started. Mandatory reporting was a good thing when it started. Now people are actually wondering if it is a good thing because maybe I really trust, pretend Matt's a faculty member in psych. I really trust him. I go in and I tell him, but he can't get the disclosure statement out where he says, wait, before you have anything to tell me, I am a mandatory reporter and I must report. Say he doesn't get that out, then all of a sudden there's a rift here, right? Because I can't make the choice of whether or not to move on. And small pieces of it do have to move on. And those small pieces are covered by Clary. It's the date, and correct me if I misstep at all. The date, the time, and the location of the event that occurred. So you do have to have the actual crime on the report. But this isn't a whole lot of information, right? In some of these cases, we ask people if they're comfortable with, say, giving the name of the perpetrator. Because if we get 2 or 3 reports on the same person, and the modus operandi looks similar, which that's a legal term, but if they say the same thing and they don't know each other, then we have a problem. Because what did Matt talk about throughout his entire presentation? It's our job to create a safe environment for you all. And if we have reports that one person is not creating a safe environment, and just by being here, they might be violating other people's rights, then we may need to have a discussion with that person. Okay, so that's covered by Clary. Now, let's say you come in and you talk to me, and you want to remain anonymous in your report. The only thing that would move forward to, right now, it's our security officers who are our clearinghouse, but I think that we might be shifting that. I would only take this information and give it to security. Within 2 days, it would go to the crime log, and depending on the severity and violence, how violent the event is, and the time that it occurred, like when it happened, you might receive an email. I get that question a lot. How many of you have wondered, why don't we get an email for every single crime? I thought the same thing when I was here as a student. Because sometimes I'd be like, well, I'm glad they told us. Then the other part of me is like, but I saw in the crime log in the Collegian that this happened just 2 days ago. Why didn't they tell me about that? And all of a sudden I was in a tizzy. But it's because if it happened 2 years ago, then the likelihood that the alleged perpetrator is around still it's lower, right? And so by informing you of what happened and when it's close by, they think, okay, maybe we can reduce risk, because people will say, all right, maybe I need to manage my risk as much as possible in this chaotic world. I'll do that, fine. And we're compliant with the law, check, that's good. So, not say, am I missing anything? Anonymous reporting. Wait, I have a list. So what happens if I file a report? We covered anonymous, but in a minute we'll cover non-anonymous name. Does the info get released to the other person? Get that question a lot too. So I come in and I report and I say, this is what happened, this is who was there, I don't know what to do. At the end of those talks, a lot of times I get, are you going to tell them? Please don't tell them. I just want to move housing and be done with it. I don't want anything else. Please don't tell them. And I'm like, we're not going to tell anyone. So now I'm telling all of you to tell your friends too. We don't call people in and say, so-and-so said you did this thing and it's terrible and so are you. We don't do that. We take the information and we follow what the survivor wants as much as we can. Now, if that person came in and said, so-and-so did this to me, and they're threatening to go out and do it again to this person, and then they're saying that they're going to do XYZ, threat, then the university may have to step in, because again, what's the point of Title IX? What's the point of clarity? Creating a safe environment. More questions? Do my parents find out? Do y'all know what FERPA is? So you get to decide what's released to your parents. So if you say only academic records, or nothing at all, or there are a couple different boxes you can check. Discipline, yeah. Depending on what boxes you check, they may or may not find out. But you're in control of that. Okay? Do you tell the police? This is another one that I get a lot. People assume that once they report to TU that somehow we have this magical data sharing application, which would be super cool, but also a little big brothery and freaky. But they assume that that information just goes straight to the police, and it doesn't. Part of me is like, maybe it would be good if it did. But the other part of me is like, or not. Because what if the survivor is a trans person or a person of color or any person who just doesn't want that information to go to the police, and they would rather just keep it in-house here at TU. They want those interim measures, and then they want to go to school and be done with their degree, and that's it. They don't want a long, drawn-out court case, because we tend to, as a society, make it really hard on survivors to report. I think we all could probably agree that someone coming forward and reporting something like this, they're going to have a rough time. That's a reality. So we don't share that data with the police. What we will do is ensure that if you want to share that data, we'll send somebody with you. Or we'll find somebody that will go with you. Or you can take whoever you need to go with you to feel comfortable when you perform or when you get that report out to them. Am I missing anything with that? Is there always an investigation? Now, okay, so this we'll get into whether or not you want an investigation, right? So if you want an investigation and a conduct board hearing and the process that comes with filing a report at TU and wanting to go forward with that, you can have that, absolutely, but it's not required. Again, some people, their first step in their healing process is coming in and saying what happened to them out loud to another person who says, I believe you. Would you like an investigation? That's it. Most people, that's all that they need. But if you do want to move forward, one, you have to sign your name to the report. We can't do an investigation on an anonymous report. We have to have somebody to stand behind the report to say, this is my investigation. So that once a decision is made, we have somebody that we can give the decision to. Does that make sense? It's a little bit different than the legal side of things, but it's also a good thing. So earlier when Matt talked about the difference between TU and say the county, TPD, what we see a lot is people say like, okay, well here's TU. Well, they keep everything in a silo, and they do that. Okay, really what we're trying to do though is this. And you're here, and you have help from both sides, and you're safe in this bubble. So we offer you certain resources that the county can't necessarily offer you, and it's the same the other way around. They can offer you a PO that applies to Tulsa County or the state of Oklahoma, where we could offer you, say, a no contact order, or depending on the finding of the hearing, a trespass ban. So we can protect you while you're here. Whereas maybe they don't protect you as well while you're here. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so let's say that you apply your name. What's my time?
4 minutes.
It's okay. Let's say you apply your name to the report. You want the investigation is conducted, and there's a conduct board hearing, and then you get your decision. You can also appeal that decision. And again, I would say, I'm not here to educate you on the specific policy. It's more how do you get to this point. And I feel like we've done a pretty solid job of that. I would encourage each of you to go and read the policy too, so that you understand what are the nuances. And then if you have additional questions, you can always come and ask us. We're always here. And Dean Mills has an open door policy. Matt has an open door policy. He's not in. But yeah, that's something that we want. We want people to be able to come in and say, so I get this part, what about this? Because the more of you that know, the more when somebody comes to you, and they will, inevitably, it may not be here, it may be years down the road, somebody will come to you and they will say, this happened, what now? What do I do? Because in a room like this, statistically, number off for me, just the women. 1, 2, 3, 4. Could you raise your hand, please? 1, 2, 3, 4. Could you raise your hand, please? And I'm making assumptions here. Please forgive me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Could you raise your hand? 1, 2, 3, 4. Kyler, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Could you raise your hand in the back? Okay, Mary Beth, there you go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Could you raise your hand? 1, 2, 3, 4. One of you raise your hand in that group. 1, 2, 3, 4. Please raise your hand. 1, 2. So we're halfway there. Raise your hand. In a room like this, the statistical representation of assault is 9 people. That's just the women who have been affected by assault. Those are national averages. So when we ask people to do those like prevention trainings and things like that, like you got this or not anymore, this is why. Because it's preventable. I have a ton of questions that I have written down. So I'm just gonna you want me to keep going? Or you wrap it up?
Let's do it.
I think I'll keep them, and then if we like hit a lull, I can read one.
Perfect.
But can we invite the other panelists back up?
Yeah.
And we'll start that process.
So, we've all been reading the news a lot lately. There's a lot happening. One thing that has been happening recently is the Education Secretary of the United States, Betsy DeVos, made a decision concerning Title IX. From what I understand, she removed the Dear Colleague letter, which was put in place to make reporting easier for survivors. Got some criticism from other people. I was wondering if you guys could expand upon that a little bit and tell us how that's going to change things, if at all, here at TU, and what that means for us.
Yeah, I can take this one. So the colleague letter in question was a 2011 colleague letter put out by the Obama administration, which a lot of people saw as strengthening protections for victims and setting standards that would remove barriers to reporting to try to get more people to report, more people to be engaged in the grievance procedures, and more people to be able to hold the perpetrators of sexual violence accountable on university campuses, in secondary schools, and so that sort of was the gist of this 2011 colleague letter, setting forth some very strict guidelines that schools would need to follow that would hopefully make the process easier. Secretary DeVos withdrew that guidance, and so because it's executive guidance, it's there at the whim of whoever's in charge. So there's nothing wrong with withdrawing guidance. It can happen. The official reasoning behind it, she said, is that it wasn't enacted after a notice and comment period. Typically, a lot of the times, executive rulemaking happens under this administrative procedure where you provide notice to everybody who's interested that you're thinking about changing the law, or you're thinking about instituting a new rule, and you give a certain amount of time and you say, send us your comments. You know, here's where we're thinking about going, and then we're going to review all the comments we get, and we may accept them or we may reject them, but at least we're going to listen to them, and then we're going to come up with a rule. I wouldn't say that notice and comment is uniformly followed in executive orders or in executive proclamations. It is certainly an avenue to do it. And so the official reasoning behind the Trump administration is that the Obama administration did not follow notice and comment. And because of that, the rules that came out in 2011 were unfair to those who are accused of sexual violence crimes because they didn't provide them enough due process. They weren't fair enough. And so she withdrew the guidance. And interestingly, it wasn't replaced with anything because the education secretary said, well, we're going to come up with new guidance, but we're going to go through the notice and comment procedures. So we're going to tell you what we're thinking, and then we're going to give you a chance to comment on it.
And, you know, we get guidance from the Justice Department, which is the grant funder for our OVW grant, and that's the information we're getting from them as well. You know, just move forward, and I don't think we will be making any drastic changes anytime soon.
So in your personal opinions, well maybe, I don't know if you're allowed to give personal opinions, but in your opinions, do you feel like people who are accused of assaults are given due process on TU's campus? Like, do you feel as if they are unfairly treated because of accusation, or are they giving the opportunity to explain themselves? I don't know, benefit of the doubt thing, I don't know. Both of you, yeah.
I am confident that we have a fair and impartial process here on campus. So I do not think that we are treating either party unfairly.
Well, and that's the beauty of Title IX. The idea is to make things equal. Unfortunately, a lot of people view Title IX as, especially within like a college campus, as like, you know, the law is designed to protect civil, like, individuals from the power of the state. Well, when an assault occurs, a lot of times it's between two people. Like it's, and on top of that, we're on a college campus, right? And so a lot of times it literally is just, we go through the investigation process, and then the conduct board looks at all the details, and then they arrive at their decision of whether or not someone's responsible. The whole thing is, though, while we're doing all of that, we can provide interim measures that make the survivor feel more comfortable and more safe regardless of what the decision is. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, which would mean, like, you know, if you wanted to move houses, or if we could ask the other person to move and someone would agree to do that because, say, they want that to be over, then that's fine. But this idea that, you know, who's right versus who's wrong, that doesn't matter. What matters the most is that we're making sure that people have options available to them. And that's both sides, right?
One of the major points in the DeVos guidance was that both parties should have the ability to appeal the decision, and that's always been our policy here. So we're really, I think, ahead of the game in a lot of respects when it comes to the new guidance as well.
Okay.
I have a question. On those interim measures, who should those technically be offered by? And let's say they aren't offered.
I actually would love to sit down with anyone who would like to talk about who might be able to offer something to someone who's going through any part of this process. Because we have a comprehensive list, but I'd also like to hear from individuals who, when they go out to seek these resources, what's the response? What was difficult when you went to that office and asked for the resource? Is there something else that we can do in order to help bridge the gap between you and the resource itself? Because at this point we have Alexander Health, we have our community partners, which is Divis and the SANE nurses, who can also, so I always want to throw this out there, they can provide Plan B, they can provide antibiotics, they provide all kinds of medical care on-site when you're done with your exam. I mentioned Alexander, we have the counseling center, CSAS for academics. Who else can you think of right now? Security can offer escorts and things like that, or also, and housing too. I mean, there are a number of different ways that we can look at this, but we also have had people come in and they request something very specific. Just because it isn't listed, if you come in and you say, hey, I think this could be helpful and here's why, we're gonna try to make that work for you, regardless of whether or not it's listed. But if you have ideas, come tell us. Because we want to make sure that those things are listed so that we have them in mind when we're offering them to the next person, right?
Well, and that's really the point. The list that we put out there is meant to be comprehensive but not exhaustive. I mean, at the end of the day, what you're entitled to under Title IX isn't just these 7 things and nothing else. It really is about making you feel safe, on campus, and that could be a very tailored solution for a particular case. And so the idea is, if you've got something in mind, share that, because we will work to try to put that in place. Because that's really where the obligation is. It just turns out that there's 5 or 6 that are pretty standard, that are kind of the go-to, that everyone knows about, but it doesn't mean that you're in any way limited. I mean, if you know something that would help you in particular, then share that, and we can get on implementing that one.
There are a lot of education nonprofits in Tulsa. Is the full extent of Title IX extended to those not fully receiving their funding from the federal government?
If someone receives any federal funding, they are obligated to engage with Title IX, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So it doesn't, yeah.
I mean,
Is that the question?
it is
Yes.
educational. That is the key. They
Yes,
have to be
yes.
somewhat a base of some sort of educational institution that receives federal funding.
So a couple years ago, there was a case that was pretty high profile, and I know it reached an appellate court status. I think it was District 10. And I won't say the name even though it's on public record, but I think the major thing there was TU ended up coming away from it non-guilty. But I think the accusation was about the process, and I could be wrong by that. I've only read a couple of the court briefs. But I know all of you were in different roles then. And I know, Matt, you might have probably not even been in your position, but can you maybe speak briefly to that case in particular, and maybe what the university learned from that, and if it's changed any of the process?
The process has certainly changed. We've done a lot of revamping and updating. As far as speaking about a particular case, though, I will say this as a person who supports her students in general. It would feel strange for me to comment on a particular case in a room like this without the person being present. I don't want to say that you all can't. I just feel strange speaking about particular cases.
And I don't know the details of that case, so I wouldn't feel comfortable expressing my opinion on that. But I will tell you that I am so grateful for our grant that we have from the Justice Department, because it is helping us look at our processes and fine-tune those processes. So I'm feeling confident moving forward. We're in a much better position in dealing with these types of cases.
And I think that when, you told us that there would be a couple of areas you might ask about prior to tonight. And it was like the second content area. So there was a question at the end posed to me that was like, can you speak to who a person should or shouldn't report to first? again, I don't think anyone should ever tell a survivor where they should or should not report to. Instead, stand with them and go with them to whoever they feel comfortable with reporting to first. However, if you can get the knowledge out there that if you can go to a confidential resource, you can hear all the options and still decide to do nothing that same day. If that's what you want, you can go home. And then the next day when you feel stronger, or the next day, or the next day, or if you never do, that's fine, but you're able to make that choice. I think that was the second part of that question. So I would reiterate that.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think a takeaway, without getting into any of the details, because I wasn't here during that lawsuit, but I am familiar with it. But I think it's been a continuing takeaway from the university. You know, there was an allegation in that suit that things were not followed through with quickly enough, based on someone at the university, based on a question arose about when the university had knowledge of the complaint and how quickly they were able to address the reporting party's needs. And because this is a lawsuit and it's not like everyday life, you have to prove certain things in order to continue in the lawsuit. And one of the things the plaintiff had to prove was that she told somebody at the university with authority, because that's just what the court requires. So there was argument over whether or not that happened. Now, it's hard to think of something like a real, we can take a takeaway from that being, well, maybe in that case, we weren't clear enough on who people with authority are. Maybe a way the university can learn from that experience is that we train everybody so that when they hear anything that sounds like, a Title IX issue, even if they're not a person with authority, they know enough to contact somebody who is. And so, that was the specific allegation, or one of them in the lawsuit. TU prevailed on that point, on that legal point, in the court's ruling. They said that, that the report had not made it to somebody who actually had enough authority at the university to do anything about it, and so TU was not derelict in being slow to respond. But that doesn't mean that we can't read that and say, wouldn't it be better if we could make everyone who's in the university community at least have enough information? I mean, we don't want people giving out bad information, but just know enough to recognize, hey, I should tell somebody else, or I should call the Title IX coordinator or someone in that office and just ask, I'm unsure about what I just heard, but I'm passing this information along. Because if they know that much, then it doesn't stay at some level that, we never find out about it. It moves forward and we're able to effectively address it. So I think that's the learning experience, from that lawsuit.
And I think since your arrival on campus, we've had several instances of folks contacting you with questions that they might not have otherwise, had you not been here, known who to contact.
Yeah, I think that, without speaking on any specific details, I have had faculty and I have had staff reach out to me directly with that exact question. I have no idea what to do. But today I talked to a student and it caused a red flag to go in my mind. And that's exactly what we want to happen. Because that particular faculty or staff member, they don't need to be an expert in what the university's resources are. But if they can just have enough recognition to be able to say, that sounds like it's a sex-based issue. That sounds like it might trigger Title IX rights and obligations. They email or call me and say, hey, I may be way off base, but here's what I know. And then I'm able to advise them, yes or no, or let's, and we can move forward with getting the student, the help that they're requesting so that these issues don't get sort of lost in translation.
So, you just said, and this is kind of a two-part question, you just said you're not going to tell someone who they should report to. Let's say someone wants to report and they want to report to a person with authority.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, who would those people be? And second of all, what is the university doing to inform all of its faculty members, like you said, of what they should be doing when they hear something that sounds like a sex discrimination issue?
I would say, if students are comfortable with talking to me, that's fine. However, Matt knows this from the law, right? And he has Title IX kind of this is his one thing, right? So if you felt comfortable going to Matt because you were ready to make a report, that's fine too. But Dean Mills can take the report as well. The three of us are fantastic resources for that in answer to your first question. Again, it's whoever the person's comfortable with. They might have a faculty member that they know would call Matt up and relay the information, but they don't necessarily know Matt and they don't want to talk to Matt directly. Instead, they'd rather talk to their faculty member. That's fine too. But we want to make sure that the information gets to one of these two if it's a student, right? They communicate as well. And can you rephrase your second question again?
Just like, what is the university doing? Matt, you talked about how you want every faculty member to have some knowledge of hearing those red flags. What are you guys doing?
You know, it's in the training that we're now making mandatory for faculty. In the faculty question or email that I got, the faculty member actually said, hey, I know I sat through the training and maybe I didn't get the full takeaway from it, but I knew enough from the training that I should be emailing you.
And it isn't.
And I was like, okay, the training was successful because at the end of the day, these are busy people and this is an in-depth subject matter. But if the takeaway is contact the Title IX coordinator to get further answers, then that's what we need to continue.
I also do mandatory reporting and disclosure trainings that are face-to-face and like this, where I can go in and engage with people and allow them to ask questions where, say, they get the answers that they want, but maybe there's one that we're still not sure of. I can bring them in and say, they had a really good question, here's what it was, let's talk about it. So that then not only do they get that training, the online training where they're seeing it laid out in front of them and they have to interact with specific cases, but also a person coming to, say, their department. I've done them with the psych department, the writing center, a couple of different places on campus, but it's all on request. So if you know of a place where they might be able to benefit from something like this, let them know that we do those trainings and we can schedule one.
And the university is getting ready to roll out mandatory training for all faculty and staff, just like the training we just rolled out for students. I think it's going to come out next week for the next.
Mary Beth, I saw you first.
So, anyone employed by the University of Tulsa is a mandatory reporter.
Yes.
Let's say someone not necessarily reports to, let's say, a professor that something happened to them, but they're saying, hey, this happened to me and I'm dealing with it, but I'm having these issues right now. And let's say the professor says, tough luck. And they don't report it, and they don't do anything about it, and all they tell the student is, tough luck. What should that student do? And what are those students' rights in that case, specifically with the fact that that teacher, who is a mandatory reporter, did nothing?
The students' rights remain the same, but I would say that if someone says that to a student, they should come and talk to the dean of students, who is, by the way, the most powerful, I would argue, other than Dr. Clancy himself, advocate on campus for students. Or two, you can also talk with Matt, because this is the thing that he does here.
Right.
And then we would.
that's what I want to know about.
Right.
Like if that experience is happening somewhere on campus, I need to know about that because clearly some retraining needs to happen with this particular person who has given such a terrible response to a student, and hopefully not just like callous reasons. Hopefully it's just misinformation or they're uninformed. But in any event, we can't allow that to happen from both a legal standpoint and then just. That's a terrible reaction to the issue. I mean, that's just morally repugnant. So I want to know that so we can fix that.
Let's say it was multiple professors in one department. Aside from retraining, what else can be done? Because that's a terrible response.
That is a terrible response. Saying tough luck to somebody that's rough. Like we were saying, morally, ethically, that's not super great. However, maybe that student should schedule an appointment with an advocate on campus, perhaps some that are sitting in this room.
Right. Because, there are other remedies. Clearly, we hope that maybe it's just a training issue, but in no way is anyone on campus above disciplinary reproach. This report will be taken seriously, and we would need to get the details to follow up on it. But that certainly training is not the only remedy that the university can have against its faculty. You know, the provost office has a whole range of ways of dealing with this variant.
Yeah.
What about graduate students who are employed as teaching assistants? Are they therefore required to report?
Also graduate assistants.
Anyone gets a paycheck.
If you get a paycheck.
Says TU on your paycheck, sorry, mandatory reporter.
Also, really quickly, I would say too, he's saying paycheck like you're employed. That's different from getting a scholarship. Okay, just saying that. Also though, if you are an RA, a research assistant, or a graduate assistant, or a teaching assistant, please let your students know that you're a mandatory reporter. Because nothing is worse than having to go and tell somebody's story, even if it's anonymously and they don't want you to.
Well, and if I could just add on that, you know, I think the mandatory reporting thing, it's scarier sounding than, you know, what it really is. I think Kelsey did a really good job about talking about what it is that actually has to get reported. It is literally just the location, the date, and the type of offense. Because that's where our Clery statistics are based on. We need to know how many of what category of offense happened in a year, where it happened. Did it happen on, and the categories aren't even specific, like a particular residence hall. I mean, it is on campus versus on campus in a residence hall, or off campus. So, I mean, these are even generic categories. And then we have to know the date so we know what year to put it in. Because we compile statistics annually, and we need to be able to say that in 2016, we had this many reports of this type of crime. This many of them happened on campus generally, this many happened in a residence hall, this many happened off campus. So that is what a mandatory reporter, you know, has to send on. You know, there's a difference between, you know, wanting to remain anonymous or confidential. You know, there's certain information they cannot keep confidential. That is, you know, that bare bones information. You know, everything else, it depends on the severity of the case. And as Kelsey said earlier, you know, absent, you know, a report of something that is an imminent danger to campus, you know, then that can stay private if that's the student's wish. It's just that, you know, we can't guarantee it, because if you come in and you report something that sounds like, wow, we have a serial rapist on campus, well then we have an obligation to make sure other students are protected. But, you know, we don't, you know, the vast majority of the kinds of allegations we're talking about are not that kind. I mean, you know, we all know that most sexual assault happens either in a dating or in an acquaintance situation, and it was not a lot of this sort of rampant serial rapist running around campus. I mean, you know, that is sort of the extreme example, but we have to say that, you know, there is an exception to the rule for confidentiality if, you know, the university believes, hey, student safety's at risk.
So I know you pointed it out a couple times, but so I'm in OL, but I also work with SA. So like I take that information, and then who do I go to with it?
Are you an RA?
No.
You're an OL?
And I
you're
work
an
in
SA.
SA.
Paid by the university.
Yeah, but I get paid.
Also, like, work studies,
We're gonna
people
talk
who work
to-
at the fitness center, like,
We're gonna talk to security about that, because right now, it's my understanding that it's RAs as far as students go.
Okay. Okay. So if someone were to come to me as like a friend, I
Yeah,
would.
right now,
Okay.
from what you've told me, no.
Okay. So I could like redirect them to you guys.
Yes,
Okay.
please do.
Right.
Yes.
Matt, in your remarks, you alluded to data about when and where assaults are most likely to happen. Do we as students have access to that data?
Via the campus climate survey, you do.
Right, you would have, not so much right now in the aggregate, it's not really there. It's being, you know, processed and accumulated. I'm not sure if, I don't see any sort of privacy concerns with sharing aggregate data. You know, I think information would be empowering. And so, you know, I can't think of a lot of reasons why aggregate data about crime statistics would not want to be shared with the full campus community. Now, certainly anything that was a specific incident that could be a privacy or other concern, you know, would need to be shielded. But, you know, this is happening on a place that you're in, and just like learning about, you know, the murder rate in Tulsa or something. I mean, that's the kind of data that we need to be informed members of the community. So I can't see any reason why that wouldn't be, packaged and shared in a way that everyone could benefit from it.
Is it in the annual security
The annual security report is a good point. That mostly is based on the annualized Clery data, and it just isn't as specific as some of the data we're wanting to collect. That right now, campus security, they're collecting what they need to collect to comply with federal law. We want to collect more data. I mean, as much data as possible, and that way we can have a more comprehensive system of awareness for the student body than what the federal government actually mandates. Now, in a particular report, we may not know too much about it, because if the reporting person, if they don't want to share it, then that won't be part of the data. But to the extent that somebody says, hey, I'm providing these facts, please, they'll be included in our university data. But it's a nice way that we can actually, you can protect the privacy interest there. But in those cases where we do have all the data, because, for example, that student that goes through the entire grievance procedure, from start to finish to disposition, I mean, we know a lot of details in that case. And so all of those data points can be pulled out and put into that larger picture.
So, say you're trying, okay, let's start over. So, say a particular person knows about a case, says a person's name in the public, where many people, how do you say what you're talking about?
So somebody
Okay,
talks about details about a case
Yes,
outside.
in the open. That's not allowed, is it? And it's a security officer. That's not allowed. Like where
No one
multiple
should
people
discuss detail. Also, so let's take it back here. Knowledge,
Yes.
education moment. If you're involved in an investigation, we often see in media representations that people are like, don't talk about this case. They do that because campuses are small. And because everyone knows everyone. And so not only does it protect the information that's being acquired during, say, an investigation process, but it protects the survivor's privacy as well. So I'll say, as a blanket statement, no one should talk about a case outside of the people who are involved in the adjudication process. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I do want to say something else too. The question about data, one, that was a really good question. Two, if people want to work on research studies like that, let me know. If they can think of questions that you think would be good to ask, let us know, because we're constantly trying to broaden the campus climate survey. One of the ways that we've learned recently that alcohol, say, interacts with sexual assault is once we start drinking, our frontal lobes are essentially deactivated. So our executive functioning goes out the window. This really kicks bystander intervention out the window too. We think that this might be affecting why sexual assault happens more often. Now, there are a multitude of other reasons that it occurs too, but if everybody in the room who could do something about something terrible happening can't even see that it's happening because their frontal lobe is turned off, then maybe we need to think about alcohol and how that affects this occurrence, right? Because oftentimes we go straight to the victim and we want to blame them in the society. What we're seeing is that's not necessarily true. Having those third parties involved can affect that as well, but the only way we know that is through the data. So thank you for asking that question. And if people have ideas about questions that could be added, please let us know.
How many people in here participated in the campus climate survey? Great.
Yes.
That helps us when we
It really does. And it also helps us understand what's actually occurring, because our Clery numbers are good, that's fine, but that's only official reports to the university. And we know that statistically it has to be happening more often. So the more data that we gather from real students in mass is helpful every time. Jessica, did you have a question?
So in the media right now, as well as the City Hall stuff, we're also seeing a lot happening with various celebrities, and the Me Too campaign just happened. I wanted to know what you guys thought about like the pros and cons of that kind of campaign, that kind of social movement. How you, and what social movements you see coming from that as well.
So pros and cons, there are no cons. So, there are no cons, guys. Also, I would say this too, oftentimes we get so hung up on, splitting ourselves down to who's right and wrong, and to that I say, who cares? It doesn't matter. If somebody feels like they can come and tell you something that's difficult to deal with, they trust you. So just believe them. And if it's the Me Too campaign, or if it's people accusing Kevin Spacey, fine. You're not the judge or the jury or executioner. You're none of those. You're just a person taking in information from possibly and most likely a friend or family member. Just be supportive. Like we offer interim measures to our students, offer anything that you can to that other person. It doesn't mean that you need to choose sides. Just tell them, I believe you. And if someone's like, well, how do you know? I don't need to know. All I know is that they trusted me enough with this information, and I can be kind. It's very simple. So yeah, no cons, only pros.
I mean, we're informing people by all these movements, and that's what it's going to take to bring an end to this.
So I have a few yes/no questions. They're pretty simple. So is it training for all these things that you're saying? Training for faculty, is that for all faculty or just new faculty? Okay, and then so if someone reports to a mandatory reporter, but they didn't have that disclosure thing and they didn't know, is it still reported?
It has to be by law.
Okay.
However, I will say this, Kyla, I've had a number of those where a student may come in, a staff member, a faculty, whoever it is, they may come in, and they're like, hey, what's up? This thing happened to me, and I'm like, okay. And then I have to have a conversation with them about the information that needs to go. Say this, I've never had a poor response to that because I've taken the time to explain why and what goes on past my office. And so I would hope that everybody in this room will go out and tell everyone everything you've heard tonight so that that doesn't have to happen. But at the same time, if we can offer that training that we're talking about that's online, and then if you know of any departments who could use a face-to-face training in addition to that, let me know so that that doesn't happen. Because that we really do want to avoid that. We want the survivor to feel as in control as possible because that's what's been taken away from them.
Okay, then last one. Matt, are you a mandatory reporter too?
Yes.
Okay.
Can we hear from, we haven't heard from you yet.
So say a student comes in and says, hey, this happened, and doesn't give you all of that information necessarily, and they don't want to give you any more information, then what do you do, and like what happens in that situation?
In that situation, I believe an information report with the information that was given to us is filed.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we would not say, badger this student about the location or no. If they started to say something and then realized that they were enacting, say, Cleary, and I don't think that that's how a student would think about it, but they might just stop and not say anything else, then we would have to take the small amount of information that we have and move it forward. But other than that, I oftentimes actually will have students come in to report, and at the end, they realize that they've taken a really big step that day. Some of them are a little worried, and that's completely understandable. And so what I usually tell them is, you can always file this as an anonymous report and update it later. It's up to you. But when they come in to see me, essentially what I tell them is, until they're ready to put their name on the report, the only people who are going to know that they have told me this is me and them. Their name will be anonymous until, the end of time, until they're ready. And that usually helps them. I've had people come in and they report and they're like, yeah! And then they're like, wait, make it anonymous. And I'm like, okay. And then 2 weeks later, they come in and they're like, I'm ready. Can you put my name on the report? And then we can. And so it looks different from everybody, but that's how the, incomplete, if you will, report would work.
But we would, of course, also offer the support services.
Always, yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the distinction between anonymous and confidential and referrals to confidential sources like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so, if you're anonymous, you can get these resources, and essentially, like I said, Dean Mills is one of, if not the most powerful advocate on campus for students. He can call whichever, let's say it's housing. The person is like, I'd like to request a roommate change, or, my roommate and I would like to move to Brown instead of Mayo. Then he can call over and say, I have 2 students who are requesting a move. Please, these are their names when they come in, just allow them to make that change. And they're like, okay. And that's that. And if Emory were to come in and say the same thing, there's no questions about what happened? No. Oh, these are the students that need it? Here you go. Make the change. There was something else too there was a twist
Is there a
there.
distinction between anonymous reporting versus reporting to a confidential source?
Yeah, so on that second part, if you go in and you talk to Emory, who is a confidential source, none of the Clery information has to go anywhere to the university. Our obligations to report these certain mandatory things only follow if you hit someone who is a mandatory reporter. So if you hit a confidential source, such as Emory or in the counseling center, anything you say just stays right there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can always give that person permission to pass along Clery information or some other degree of information, but you have full discretion over what leaves that conversation. If it's someone else who's not a confidential report, you can still report anonymously. I mean, but certain information, they have a duty to pass along. So if you happen to mention the date and the location, that's going, and then what happened to you, that is going to go over as sort of just blanket data. And the way it will be is, that person will basically send me an email. I received a report that on this date, at this location, this occurred. And that is literally the only information that leaves, that room. You can remain anonymous, but that information did have to leave. It did have to get into the university system so it can get into our data management, because that is our obligation under federal law. Whereas we don't have that triggered if you talk to Emory or if you talk to someone in the counseling center.
And we say into the system. I mean, I feel like a lot of people are like, what does that mean? Who can see that? Matt keeps a database. It's his database. Security keeps their database. It's password protected. His office is locked. I mean, the computer's password protected. So it's not as though that information is just out floating in the ether either.
Right.
I do want to say that.
But I mean even more than that. If you tell something to a faculty member that you're close with, I mean, clearly they know your name, you're doing it face to face. They don't have to give me, they don't give me your name. I get the email that says date, location, what happened. So literally my records are going to say anonymous in the name because I'm not the one who talked to the student. So that there's no sort of centralized database of this extra information. Now, if you say during, the conversation, I'm comfortable with X, Y, and Z also being passed along, just so that the university knows, or so that, certain other things can be taken, that's fine. But if you're not comfortable, it doesn't get passed along. Just that information which, is very generic.
And oftentimes students ask too, they're like, well, won't everyone know? The email is going to go out and everyone's going to know. And that's a rough conversation to have with a survivor who is coming in and essentially bearing this dark piece of their soul to you. At the same time, I would argue, and I often talk them through that panicked response that they have, is that as much as Tulsa is pretty small, it's also quite large. There might be a few people who might be able to piece together that maybe you're the person because you talked to them about something that happened a week ago. But the likelihood that they apply you to that specific email and they know it was you, and then they're gonna go off and they're gonna tell it, that's pretty low. A lot of times people get really, really worried about the emails, and maybe that's different in this room right now, but I've had that question a number of times before too. And so I would encourage you to, as students of the university, when you hear people saying things like that, either one, encourage them to come talk to us about that, or two, relay what you hear here. Like, that's not necessarily the case. And oftentimes, security actually tries to wash details as much as possible. It's literally one sentence. An incident occurred at this, on campus on this date. That's it.
No location of
Yeah,
department or.
And that's another thing that, is it sort of a new change, we're trying to interject my office in between security, maintaining the Clery data, and the person who takes the data, passing it on, because, that is an investigative office, and it's easier for us to be assured that only the most generic data goes on if it gets filtered before it gets to security, because they're doing the report. Well, their report can only be so detailed that the email from me doesn't have any details in it. But when they get the call from faculty, if it's a little more detailed, sometimes that report might end up being more detailed than we'd like it to be. And so I think this is just one of the steps that we're instituting in trying to just put a little buffer in between the people who author the campus crime stuff and the person making the report. And I think that that's going to be good moving forward.
We're out of time. I'm sure you guys might be here for a couple of minutes.
Or come see me, or Matt, or Dean Mills. We're around, all the time. I tell students all the time, you see me on campus, you want to wave and ask a question, come over and ask, please. Because the more people that know this information, the more people can benefit from it.
Another round of applause for